The African Mining Indaba kicks off this morning. It's the first in-person conference since the COVID-19 pandemic. The mining industry and players, as well as government officials from across the continent, will gather in Cape Town. Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe is expected to deliver the opening address today. For more on what we can expect, let's bring in the founder of Peta Attorneys, Dineo Peta, who joins us via our video link this morning. Dineo, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time. I'm hoping to speak more about representation with you as we try to make sense of this year's Mining Indaba. According to a report by McKinsey & Co. released last year, women are still underrepresented across all sectors of the mining industry. Is that because opportunities don't exist, or there's a lack of interest from women, or perhaps a mixture of both?
I would attribute it, good morning firstly, Ayanda, and thank you for having me. I'd attribute it to the historical imbalances of South Africa's past and the history of the segregation of women from key sectors of the economy and where they were befitting for less influential roles. So I think that is largely what is attributed to. We have many black female mining engineers. We have many geologists. So the opportunities are there. I would just believe that the historical barriers to entry do still exist.
And it's not just about having women in the sector, right? We need to also have a cross-sectional analysis of leadership in the sector. I imagine that paints a whole lot more of a bleak picture.
Quite correct. It goes all the way, up to executive management. And it goes into driving such transformation initiatives all the way down within the various organizational levels.
The Mining Indaba is something that's anticipated year in and year out. I wonder to what extent you reckon these kind of gatherings help solving these kind of issues.
I don't think these gatherings solve these issues. If we look at the theme for this year's Mining Indaba, it speaks to just energy transition, and understandably so based on the impacts and effects of climate change across the globe and how mining needs to adapt to that. I think from a transformation and a women empowerment perspective, we see that more when mining charters are audited on their compliance to the Mining Charter and the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act.
Yeah. The theme itself is evolution of African mining, investing in energy and transition. And as you put it, there's certainly no downplaying why that's important. But, as the saying goes, we can walk and chew at the same time. For those people, I guess, who are still trying to place why those kind of conversations are important in the sector, how would you, I guess, respond to that in a context where, some people, dare I say, almost become desensitized?
Almost become what?
Desensitized to these issues.
Yeah, I think as well we have the impact of legislation and court judgments. I'd like to speak to the impact of the judgment of Minerals Council versus the Minister of Mineral Resources, dealing with the statutory interpretation of the Mining Charter, which has basically declared certain provisions of the Mining Charter invalid. And the effect of that is essentially desensitizing and putting the spotlight away from transformation and what exactly the objective of the Mining Charter is.
There's also a lot of work, I guess, gone into actually trying to understand the kind of work specifically women can do in mining. I mean, when we speak about mining, it's either you consider the Neil Fronemans of this world who sit in boardrooms and make decisions at that level, or actual workers who are underground doing the labor, so to speak. In the latter space, how much room is there for discussion about the inclusion of women there?
I must say, since Minister Gwede Mantashe took office as the Minister of Mineral Resources, we have seen a lot of change and improvement within measures taken to advance women and their protection, specifically on the ground, underground and labor. Much improvement is still required, but we have seen substantial improvement through the charter itself, actually, which requires the charter that was passed under Minister Mantashe in 2018 spoke to on the inclusive procurement and supplier development, spoke to specifically women and youth empowerment. So I think that was a great development that we saw within industry that seeks to have an inclusive environment for women.
For women who are in the sector, there's also calls for them to be buddied in some way. I imagine that speaks to some kind of mentorship program that has real material outcomes. What kind of, I guess, shape do you reckon that something like that can take?
It takes the shape. You know, I always say that those of us who have been empowered have a reciprocal obligation to empower others. And the shape that kind of takes is for a fellow women, such as myself and women in corporate, women in government, to be able to mentor those who are within their respective areas of operation. So, for instance, you know, in our firm, we hire only women, and we are specifically intentional about it. And I think if we had to see that being spread across various divisions of industry, we'd see a great improvement in terms of transformation designed to empower women.
Yeah. If we can touch on the theme just a bit, I mean, in what ways do you reckon this needs to be explored in order to be able to address all these different issues? I mean, as you've already rightly pointed out, the main objective, so to speak, is around just energy transitions. We know that mining itself is responsible for a huge part of South Africa's carbon footprint. But that doesn't mean these issues should fall by the wayside.
No, not at all. And in implementing just transition and climate change adaptation strategies, within those strategies, we need to give effect to legislation such as the BEE Act, the BEE codes, and the mining charter. So these are legislative compliance methodologies that should be implemented concurrently when we give effect to climate change adaptation measures.
Yeah. Just out of interest, how does South Africa's mining industry, when it comes to gender parity, compare to, you know, the industry in some of our sort of counter countries, or in some of the South Africa's peers, so to speak?
I would say if we had to compare with South Africa's peers, and if we're speaking to peers, I'd say I would assume you're referring to developing countries.
Yeah.
And I think the democratic government has done a substantial amount of work in enforcing, developing and enforcing legislation that gives effect to transformation for women. In a lot of other developing countries, the disparities still remain. So in that regard, I'd say South Africa has improved quite a lot from where it was historically.
Yeah, certainly not where we used to be, but there's a long way still to go. Dineo Peta.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of more improvements still required.
Yeah, and wish you well for your involvement at this year's Indaba. Certainly hoping these kind of issues are also centralized in the ongoing discussions in that gathering. But for now, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Dineo Peta is the founder of Peta Attorneys Incorporated, shining a spotlight there on women representation within the mining industry as we count down to this year's African Mining Indaba.